Ukraine enters another tense and painful chapter in its war with Russia. In Kyiv, President Volodymyr Zelensky delivers one of his clearest warnings yet. Ukraine must ensure that no Russian strike goes unpunished. His remarks follow a deadly night in the capital, where Russian missiles tore through residential buildings, killing civilians in their homes and wounding dozens more. Hours later, a Russian drone attack targeted a market in the south, adding to the day's toll. As day breaks over Kyiv, the city moves between shock and determination. Emergency workers sift through the sitting rubble of an apartment building, searching for survivors and retrieving bodies. For the president, the overnight attacks underscore a simple reality. Russia's strategy depends on terror, and Ukraine must match it with resilience and retaliation. In his daily address, Zelensky begins by detailing ongoing military support from Western partners. He highlights the Pearl program, Ukraine's priority needs list, which allows the government to acquire American weaponry, especially air defense systems. Patriot missiles, he says, have been crucial, and last night they proved their worth. When Russian ballistic missiles streaked toward Kyiv, Patriot crews intercepted them with precision. But even as Zelensky praises their performance, he stresses that Ukraine needs more interceptors, more systems, and more long-range capabilities. He confirms new commitments from Northern Europe. Denmark, Finland, Iceland, and Norway, along with the Baltic states. Together, they have pledged an additional $500 million to the PUL framework. This new funding represents a significant boost as Ukraine prepares for a winter that once again will be shaped by Russian strikes against energy infrastructure. Zelensky then outlines another major development. Ukraine and France are finalizing a defense agreement that will expand air defense cooperation and support the modernization of Ukraine's air force. French officials have already signaled openness to deeper military engagement, especially as Ukraine pushes for more advanced European systems. But the president's message is not limited to weapons. He also focuses on an urgent domestic priority, securing the country's energy needs for the winter. Ukraine is negotiating with Greece to optimize gas supply options, part of a broader effort to strengthen the country's energy security. Agreements are being finalized with partners from Norway to Greece, each contributing to a strategic buffer intended to prevent last year's scenario when millions of Ukrainians faced rolling blackouts and sub-zero temperatures in apartments damaged by missile fire. As Zelensky shifts to discussing Ukraine's missile program, he highlights a significant milestone. The Long Neptune system, an extended-range derivative of Ukraine's domestically produced Neptune missile, has demonstrated increasing effectiveness in long-range strikes against Russia. These missiles, once used primarily for maritime defense, have evolved into a tool capable of hitting strategic targets deep inside Russian territory. Zelensky credits both Ukrainian engineers and the soldiers deploying these systems, remarking that each month brings more impressive results. His tone sharpens as he addresses Russia directly. He says that Moscow will find it increasingly difficult to turn a blind eye to the war. With Ukraine's growing arsenal of long-range weapons, the consequences of Russia's attacks will be felt far beyond the front lines. The message is that Russia's sense of distance, the illusion that its cities lie outside the conflict, is fading. But the price Ukraine is paying remains painfully visible. Zelensky recounts the casualties from the morning's attacks. 6 people killed in Kyiv alone, more than 30 injured, including children. The missile that tore through the apartment building left families without homes just as winter descends. Elsewhere in the country, villages and towns suffered drone and artillery attacks, adding to the growing list of civilian losses. Against this backdrop, Zelensky says Ukraine must do everything possible to ensure that each Russian attack carries a cost militarily, diplomatically, and economically. He points to international sanctions as one of Ukraine's most important tools. The cumulative pressure from sanctions on Russian oil exports to restrictions on high-tech components is beginning to show results. Ukrainian and Western analysts believe Russia's long-term war-fighting capacity is being strained by these measures, though Moscow continues to use stockpiled supplies to keep its operations running. The president also addresses an internal priority, governance and corruption control. Ukrainian Prime Minister Yulia Svyridenko has presented a report on the ongoing audit of all state-owned enterprises. This sweeping review is intended to root out inefficiencies and ensure transparency in wartime operations. Zelensky says every irregularity will be forwarded to law enforcement and anti-corruption agencies, and that the government is committed to providing full support for the process. This marks one of the strongest public commitments to internal reform since the start of the war, a move aimed at ensuring continued Western support and strengthening public trust. Beyond the president's speech, Ukraine's broader situation remains complex and volatile. On the front lines in the east, fighting continues near Kupiansk, Bakhmut and Avdiivka. Russian forces have attempted to regain momentum in these sectors, increasing both ground assaults and artillery strikes. Ukrainian commanders say the enemy has adapted its tactics, rotating fresh units into battle and using drones to spot weaknesses in Ukrainian defences. Despite these efforts, territorial changes remain limited, with much of the fighting taking place in forests, trenches and ruined industrial zones. In the south, Ukrainian missile and drone strikes continue to target Russian logistics hubs and supply lines. The introduction of new long-range systems, including the updated Neptune variants, has expanded Kyiv's ability to hit ammunition depots, oil terminals and military bases behind Russian lines. These operations are designed to stretch Russia's supply chain, disrupt its command structures and weaken its resilience ahead of the winter season. Meanwhile, Russia continues to use long-range missiles and Iranian-style drones to strike Ukrainian cities. The overnight attack on Kyiv shows Moscow's intent to erode civilian morale and force Ukraine to divert air defense resources away from the front. Ukrainian officials say Russia aims to create chaos during the winter months by targeting energy infrastructure, as it did during the previous winter. Since October, air defense crews have been on constant alert, moving between positions in anticipation of large-scale missile barrages. The humanitarian situation remains equally dire. Displaced families continue to arrive in cities like Lviv, Ternopil and Dnipro, seeking shelter from heavy fighting in the east and south. Aid organizations report rising demand for heating equipment, medical supplies and food assistance. Many families still live in damaged buildings with temporary repairs. The government and local communities have launched rapid repair teams to cover broken windows, reinforce walls and restore heating systems wherever possible, but resources are stretched thin. Internationally, Ukraine's diplomatic efforts have intensified. Kyiv's representatives are lobbying for more air defense units, especially as reports suggest Russia may increase its production of ballistic missiles through partnerships with Iran and North Korea. European partners continue to push for joint ammunition production and faster delivery schedules, acknowledging that Ukraine's needs are growing faster than current supply lines can sustain. In Washington, bipartisan support for Ukraine has faced challenges, but US officials continue to emphasize that Ukraine's survival is in America's strategic interest. Discussions about additional Patriot systems, NASAMS units and long-range strike capabilities are ongoing. Analysts believe that Western reluctance to supply certain systems earlier in the war has gradually shifted as Ukraine demonstrates responsible, effective use of long-range weapons. At the same time, Russia's internal situation is shifting. Economic pressure is increasing, military casualties continue to mount, and dissatisfaction is quietly growing in regions far from Moscow. Ukrainian intelligence reports suggest that Russia has had to rely more heavily on private contractors, prison recruits, and forced mobilization to sustain its offensive operations. Against this broader backdrop, Zelensky's insistence that no Russian strike goes unpunished is more than rhetorical. It signals Ukraine's transition into a more assertive phase of the conflict, one in which long-range strikes, improved air defences and growing international cooperation form the backbone of a comprehensive strategy. As winter approaches, Ukraine braces for new challenges. Energy infrastructure is fortified wherever possible. Cities prepare shelters and heating centres. Military units rotate and reinforce their positions. Engineers continue to refine the Long Neptune programme, working to expand its range and accuracy. Diplomats push for more sanctions, more weapons and more political pressure on Moscow. In Kyiv, clean-up crews continue their grim morning duties. The rubble of the apartment building struck overnight has become another symbol of the war's human cost. Volunteers bring blankets, water and food to residents who lost everything in an instant. Even as grief settles in, the city moves forward the pattern of survival that has defined Ukraine since the first day of the invasion. Tonight, the president's message is clear. The war is far from over, but Ukraine is not standing still. With new weapons, new alliances and new strategies, the country is preparing for the long fight ahead. Every attack, every loss and every act of defiance reinforces Zelensky's warning that Russia will not escape the consequences of its actions and that Ukraine's response will be felt on every front. This is Ukraine. On November 14th, 2025, a nation battered but unbroken, determined to ensure that the suffering of its people is neither ignored nor unanswered.